rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. I'm going to start sharp today at 6:30 because I do want to get through the what's left of this matan, inshaAllah ta'ala, or what's left of this first semester. Feel free to come up front if you like. So there's still maybe another 10 small paragraphs that we're going to go, 10 paragraphs to go through. But as I pointed out initially in this matan, parts of these mutun, of these Islamic texts, are extremely relevant because they talk about rituals, talk about marriages, they talk about stuff that you go through every day, so we take time. And others aren't as relevant, not because the concept is important, but because they were written at a time where people lived a life in a certain way. So the way that the text is written is to serve the people who are living during that time. Meaning a lot of like this, the chapter in selling and goods and all that, it's really addressing the needs of people 850 years ago in terms of how they bought and sold and how they lived their lives. So it may not be as relevant to you. Again, a lot of the ahkam, the rulings that we'll find in these chapters they're not based on certain evidence. Like it's not based on Quranic wordings, and sometimes not even based on prophetic narrations, but rather on ijtihadat, meaning on the comprehensions and understandings of the scholars and the consensus within the madhab that they came to when they talked about these topics. Not that that's not important. It just tells you that the level of evidence that's being used and the level of law that we're looking at is not A. It's maybe C or D that we're looking at. And these texts are not sacred, and that's important to me for you to understand. They're not sacred, but they're important because they explain the logic of how Islam actually worked. And then when we do the second semester, you'll see there's some stuff there that you may not even agree with, that I don't agree with anymore. And I don't think that was the right way of going by things. But we have to respect the rationale, the logic, the way of looking at things, respect the madhab, and then we build on it, because Islamic fiqh is something that needs to be built on by those who are qualified to do so. And this is really what I'm trying to get you to understand. And the reason that you should learn a madhab, you can say, well, why do I even need this? Well, because you need a default when it comes to your rituals. When it comes to your ritual specifically for salah and siyam and zakah and hajj, you need a default, something to go by, some way to do the actual ritual. And then if you learn a madhab, it doesn't have to be Shafi'i, it could be any madhab. You learn a madhab, then you pray and fast and pay zakah and do hajj based on that madhab. And then if you have a part or an issue that's causing you difficulty within these rituals, and tahara obviously is an additional piece to that, then you can go and study the evidence, look at the different opinions, and choose what makes more sense to you, and leave your madhab in that specific issue that you found was causing you difficulty. That's the way, as Muslims, we're supposed to go by our deen. This is the proper way of learning Islam. You learn a madhab, and then if something is causing you a lot of grief, then you study madhab Shafi'i, where if you touch a woman who's not your mahram, meaning you touch your wife or someone, then you lose your wudu, and that's because in your line of work is very difficult for you because you're always dealing with people, you're buying and selling, and then you can go and study the topic outside of the madhab, see what the scholars have looked at, and if it makes sense to you, the evidence that supports the other opinion, you can leave your madhab and take the other opinion, but you do it based on knowledge, not based on bias, not based on desire and whim, and not based on ignorance or just convenience. It's based on knowledge, which is what we're supposed to do here. When it comes to selling and buying, you don't have to have a default madhab. Like certain aspects, certain chapters within this method, you don't have to have a default, but I do need you to understand how they looked at things. I need you to understand some of the rulings that existed here, the ones that are important. And I pointed those out, and the ones that I kind of just jogged through, they're not as important, but I need you at least to read them and have a general understanding of how Islamic law worked. So here we're at lending. يقول الإمام المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه وكل ما أمكن الانتفاع به مع بقاء عينه جازت إعارته إذا كانت منافعه آثارا وتجوز العارية مطلقة ومقيدة بمدة وهي مضمونة على المستعير بقيمتها يوم تلفها. So this is talking about lending. It's permissible to lend anything that can be benefited from as long as the item itself is not consumed, and as long as the benefit is a service. So I can't lend you my apple. How do I? It's going to be consumed. That's not lending. You can't use that word. So you have to use some other. Is it a gifting? It can be a loan. It can't be lending, because lending, you have to lend something where the actual essence, the item itself, is not consumed. You're going to be able to take it back at some point. Even if it's going to be used, there may be some wear and tear, but it's not going to be consumed. And that's the point that he's making. And as long as the benefit is a service itself, and there's something to benefit from it. It is permissible to lend something without restrictions. Also permissible to restrict its duration. Meaning, I can lend it and not put a date of when you have to give it back to me, or I can lend it to you and you have to give it, and I say, this is the day you have to return it to me. And that's important. And the borrower is liable for it. Meaning, once I lend you something and you borrow it and it's with you, you're liable for whatever it is you took from me. The amount owed is based on the value the day the item was destroyed, not the day it was lent. So, if I lend you my car for a month, right? And after a month, or maybe for a year, because in a month it's not going to work out, for a year. And then at the day you're supposed to bring it back, you're driving over to give me my car, and you had a horrible accident, and the car was totaled, and it wasn't insured. So now you owe me that car that you, Islamically, I lent it to you, so you owe me the value of that car. You don't owe me the value of the car the day I lent it to you. You owe me the value of the car the day it was destroyed. Does that make sense? So, well, no, I lent it to you, the same year. I bought it that same year. Yeah, I know, but you lent it to me. You knew that a year was going to go by. It's not like I fooled you. You knew I was going to borrow it for a year. So within a year, it's going to lose its value a year later. So you can't be paying for something's value from the day that it was actually lent, not from the day it was destroyed. And that goes almost for anything else that is lent. But the idea here in Islamically, lending is a contract. It's a verbal contract and it's binding. So if I lend you something, then you're actually you're liable for it. You can't say, well, I borrowed it and it got destroyed. Sorry. No. Islamically, this is a contract. If I lent it to you and you accepted that from me as borrowing it, then you're liable for it. Especially even if, and this is interesting, even though you may not be necessarily responsible, meaning someone came and just ambushed you and took it and stole it, you're still liable for it because you borrowed it. And there's not much else you need to know from that. ومن غصب مالا لأحد لزمه رده وأرش نقصه وأجرة مثله فإن تلف ضمنه بمثله إن كان له مثل أو بقيمته إن لم يكن له مثل أكثر ما كانت من يوم الغصب إلى يوم التلف. So this is wrongfully taking something. This is an interesting piece. So if I took away your property by force and I held on to it, right? And I held on to it, and then you went to the courts of law to get back what it is that I took from you. And this usually happens regarding inheritances and stuff like that, like disagreements regarding things that were left by a deceased. That's where usually these things occur. But I took something and it's your property, but I held on to it for a long time, and you had to go through the full legal system to get your what you wanted. So when you get it back, so whoever wrongfully takes property is required to return the property with compensation for damages and its rental value for the duration it was taken. So I took your land for maybe 3 years. It took you 3 years to be able to get your haqq back, right? So you took it back. You take back the land. Now, any harm done to the land, the compensation I have to pay. And I have to pay you rent for 3 years. So how much you have? So you have it, what's the word? You have it assessed? No. You have appraised with an A. Yeah. So you have it appraised to see what is the rent of that piece of land for a month. I took it for 3 years. That's 36 months. You time it by 36 months, and I owe the person not only damages, but 36 months worth of rent of the thing that I took away, or I held on to that was lawfully yours, or not wrong, or not mine. So that's important. If the property is destroyed, right? So the person has to replace it with an identical item if one exists. So if I took your car by force, or I took it away by dhulman, unjustly or unfairly, and then you were able to get it back, and I ruined the car, I totaled the car, then I owe you the same car, same year. Like I owe you to give you the exact same thing. If there's nothing similar to it, like if I wrongfully or unfairly took like a 1964 vintage car that there's nothing, they don't make them anymore. They don't exist anymore, you can't buy them, right? So I can't replace it with the same car. Well, then it has to be appraised. What was it worth? What was it worth to begin with? So, and it's you're liable for its maximum value from the time it was taken until the day it was destroyed. So the maximum value. It's not for you don't pay for it what it was worth the day it was destroyed or the day I took it. It's the maximum value that I can carry throughout that period. Then I owe you that. Because the logic here is that if I had it, when it hit its maximum value, I could have sold it. And that money would have been mine. but you took it against my will, and then you're going to give me the worst price for it? No, that's not fair. Again, that's not fair. It's all about all of these. So you can say, well, look, I'm not putting up the evidence sheet anymore, because the evidence sheet exists in the book that has all the evidence, but these don't follow strict pieces of evidence. It's not strict. This is based on Islamic law. Islamic law, meaning al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, the rules of jurisprudence, it follows this basic concept, which is whatever it is that is taken away from someone unjustly, you have to be fully fair when the person gets it back again. You have to get full value for whatever they lost, and that's where this is coming from. Meaning what I'm explaining to you is based on a jurisprudent law that the Shafi'is follow, rather than a specific. Now, there may be a specific example in some of the books of hadith, but the authenticity may lack, and it may not be a perfect analogy. Rather, they follow these jurisprudent laws, and they make more sense. All right, so this is the chapter of preemption, which may not make sense to you if you just read it. So I'll explain what it means in a moment. والشفعة واجبة بالخلطة دون الجوار فيما ينقسم دون ما لا ينقسم وفي كل ما لا ينقل من الأرض وغيره بالثمن الذي وقع عليه البيع وهي على الفور فإن أخرها مع القدرة عليها بطلت وإذا تزوج امرأة على شقص أخذه الشفيع بمهر المثل وإن كان الشفعاء جماعة استحقوها على قدر الأملاك. So preemption, I think I explained it here. So here's what it is. This happens when you have joint ownership of something and you want to sell the item. You should give preference to selling the item in full to the co-owner. So if we own a car together and I want to sell my half, or maybe I own 40% of the car, for example. I want to sell the 40%. The co-owner gets dibs. That person has to be offered to buy me out before I offer. And this exists even in law today. Like that's still, there's actually clauses in law today that point that out. That has to be offered to the co-owner the opportunity to buy you out. Because the co-owner maybe owned this item with you because of you. Like they're willing to own something half and half, or with whatever percentage, because they want to. They're okay with you as a person, but they may not be interested in co-owning something with someone else. So you're like, well, I'm out. I'm tired. I don't want to own this anymore. I'm going to sell it. But that person is now being treated unfairly because they never wanted to co-own with some random person that you're going to sell it to. They wanted to do it with you. If you don't want to do it anymore, they have the right at least to buy you out themselves, so that they're not stuck with someone that they don't want to be stuck with. And you can think about that in huge. Maybe in small stuff it's not that big a deal, but when you're owning large pieces of land, or this is regarding like a huge a business that's worth many $1 million, then maybe someone doesn't want to be a partner with a person that they don't know. So that's what shuf'a means. So preemption is an intrinsic right when there's joint ownership, so not neighboring properties. Not neighboring properties. Oh, this is something that happens in the Middle East all the time. Oh my God, people fight so hard. And they go to courts for years and years. So you have a piece of land, and right beside you is a piece of land owned by someone else. You want to sell your piece of land. The guy who owns the piece of land beside you, they come and they ask for shuf'a. They ask for preemption. I want the opportunity to sell you out, to buy you out. They don't have the right to do that. Now, it's obviously kind to do it, but Islamically speaking, from a legal, religious legal perspective, they don't have the right. Just because your land is beside them, just because there's neighboring, doesn't give them the right for preemption. They have to own an aspect of that land with you. And this happens when there's, again, inheritance. So two brothers, they inherit a piece of land from their father. There's joint, they both own the land. It has not been divided yet. So if he wants to sell his piece of land, the brother has preemption, meaning they have the ability to buy them out. After a few years, once they divide the land and they put a very clear division, and now this brother's living here, the other one's living over there, he wants to sell his land out, then preemption does not exist. However, within, and this is an additional piece that may not mean much to you, but within the Shafi'i madhab, however, if someone owns a piece of land within a neighborhood that is owned by a family, and he wants to sell his piece of land, the family has preemption. Like they have the right to buy that person out, because they may not want someone who's not from the family to actually own land in the middle of the neighborhood because they maybe had sold it to this gentleman or this gentleman who's actually from the family, but they want to leave. So preemption exists for that specifically. When we talk about neighborhoods that are, so if you come from the Middle East or you may have something, you ask your dad, there may be something like that, where this is the neighborhood that Jiddik Allah yarhamu or Jidda used to own this piece of land, and now all the brothers and sisters are living close by, and then one of them is like, you know what, I don't want to live in this, horrible place anymore. I want to go to the city. So they want to sell a piece of land, and they want to sell it to someone who's willing to buy it for a lot of money, and then everyone around them, they have a problem. What do you mean? You're going to bring some gharib amongst us? They're going to fight? So Islamically, they have preemption there. Like they have preemption to actually ask for the ability to buy out. And you say, well, what's the difference? Why don't you just sell it to your brother? Because in Shufa, as we're going to explain in a moment here, it's appraised and you pay what the appraisal is. Right? So let's say you appraise this piece of land, it turns out to be $50,000. Huh? So preemption, I will pay you the $50,000. Without preemption, this person may have found a person to buy it for $100,000. You understand the issue? He may have found someone who doesn't understand the value of anything, and he told them it's worth this much. You're like, all right, I'll pay you $100K. But the actual value is $50K. You understand where this becomes a problem? So the person who has the right of preemption will say, no, I have the right to buy you out. I don't want you to sell it to the other person. Well, then you have to buy it for $100K. That's what that guy offered me. No, I buy it from you for whatever it's going to be appraised for. Whatever understand the difference with appraisal and that, and people don't like that. Because I found someone who's going to buy it from me for twice. Well, it doesn't matter because I have the right of preemption. This is where this becomes important. That's where Shufa is important. So Shufa is when there's joint ownership. And the example I gave you, whenever it's like a piece of land, for example, amongst a neighborhood that is restricted to a certain family, someone wants to leave, that family has the right for preemption to buy that person out. Oh, you have no idea then what's the problem that comes from this. Oh, I've seen people pull guns on others for this stuff. There have been gunshots and people have died and people have killed one another over stuff like this. It becomes very, 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 very sensitive, especially in parts of the world where it's rural and simple and people don't like. They're not sure of who. They're not happy with a foreign family coming in and living right in the middle of their neighborhood. They find that very, very invasive and difficult. So preemption, shufa, is an Islamic ruling that helps fix that problem. And of course comes from again, Islamic logic or Islamic law in general, not specifically a hadith. In things that retain their original utility when divided, so for example, land. In things that cannot be transported, such as real estate and others, and for the agreed upon sale price. So preemption must be declared immediately. It is void when one delays even though one is able to preempt. So the moment the person, it has to happen right out at the moment. Meaning a person says, I want to sell. Now the person who has the right for preemption has to immediately claim it. They can't say, well, I need to think about it. No. This person wants to sell now. He doesn't want to sell next month or next year. You want to sell now. So if you have the right for preemption, then you're going to claim that immediately. If you say, well, if you don't claim it, meaning the information arrives at your doorstep that this person wants to sell, and you don't claim preemption right when you could, then you lose the right to do so. And that's another important piece. So a guy who wants to sell his piece of land in the middle of a neighborhood, and he says, I'm going to sell it, and the family is like, well, we have preemption rights, fine. And they're like, but we're going to buy it from you 5 years from now. No. Now. You'll buy it from me now. And if you can't buy it from me now, then I'm going to sell it to someone else, and that's his right. And that's what they have to deal with. And that's when people pull guns and start shooting each other, unfortunately. If one marries a woman, for example, and agreed upon marriage payment is a parcel of land that a co-owner preempts, the co-owner must pay her amount similar to women receive. Mahr al-mithil. Meaning, we both own land. We own land. And I said, your mahr is a piece of this land, a piece of my my ownership. I don't, shiqs meaning just a piece. I don't specify exactly how much that's going to be. So my co-owner can say, no, I don't want your wife to own a piece of land with me for whatever reason. I don't want a third person owning this piece of land. Then that partner can actually buy out the wife's piece of land that she was given with mahr al-mithil, meaning by giving her the amount of dowry that the women her age and her part of the world would normally receive, unless the husband obviously specifies a certain percentage of land. And then in that case, it has to be appraised and she has to take what that. But if he doesn't, so that's what shiqsir means. Meaning just giving her a piece of land, like a portion of my land, and it will be agreed upon later, or it's not not fully specified, or the piece of land is not actually drawn out. Then he can preempt, uses preemption rights, and give her mahr al-mithil in substitution for that. If preemption is opted for by a group, the entitlement of each is in proportion to their ownership. So let's say the three of us own this piece, the four of us own this piece of land. You own 20%, 15%, 10%, and then you own whatever's left, and you want to sell your piece. Then we all have preemption based on the percentages we own. So I don't have more, so I own the least, 10, 15, 20. So the person who's going to be able to use their preemption rights to buy the most of your share is going to be the person who has 20%. And then the one after, so it's going to be mathematically proportionate to what our actual ownership is, if that makes any sense to you. Again, they're mathematical stuff. That doesn't matter that much if you know the details. But I just want you to understand what preemption is. It's whenever people have joint ownership, then before you sell something, that person has the right to buy you out once it's appraised and it's done with the right amount. So, and that's important because it makes a difference for people. All right. So I just made some, just in case, the way that it's worded in the metin or the translation is a little bit, I don't know, I found it a little bit confusing even for me when I was reading. I wasn't sure exactly what he was trying to explain. So I just wrote it here just for, Jazakallah khair, Brother Emmanuel had put it together, so I just put it here. The item has to be something that cannot be removed. If the item is movable, like cars and animals, the preference does not need to be given to the co-owner, but of course the item itself that was sold, the co-owner needs to be given his share of the profit earned from the sale. And that's if you co-own a car and I sell the car, obviously you need to be given the amount of the car. The car itself, you can't preempt a car. Like you can't have preemption on a car, something that is mobile like that. It's more like, this is more about real estate, honestly. Like when we talk about shuf'a, preemption is mostly real estate, houses and pieces of land. I haven't really seen it occur in anything else, actually. Wallahu alam. All right, so financing a profit-sharing venture or just investing. So I don't know why. So it's really just, it's investing. I took a lot of time. At first I thought I was insane. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out why did he say financing a profit-sharing venture. So you can see them 1, 2, 3, 4 words. And investing is just pretty much the same. I don't really see the difference between investing and finance. Like I looked into the definition of both to see if, am I missing something here? Is this? But it's pretty much the same. It is a form of investing. It's a form of investing. Let's put it that way because investing has different forms. So and it's called in Shafi'iyya, they call it qirad. And if you ever heard this, you ever heard al-mudaraba? Ever heard the word mudaraba before? This is mudaraba. But the Shafi'iyya don't call it mudaraba, they call it qirad. Other madhahib call it mudaraba. And it's something we'll talk about more when we study the Maliki madhab or the Hanafi. وللقراض أربعة شرائط, because they talk about it more than here. أن يكون على ناض من الدراهم والدنانير وأن يأذن رب المال للعامل في التصرف مطلقا أو فيما لا ينقطع وجوده غالبا وأن يشترط له جزءا معلوما من الربح وألا يقدر بمدة ولا ضمان على العامل إلا بعدوان وإذا حصل ربح وخسران جبر الخسران بالربح. Okay, let's explain this. This is important, I believe. So financing profit-sharing ventures or vesting is permissible under 4 conditions. Number 1, the contract is based on gold or silver currency, so it has to be based on money. Again, this is, if you remember, we went back. If you go back a little bit, you'll find a similar condition for a few other things where we pointed out, not necessarily, the Shafi'is later on don't actually necessarily have this condition. So the same thing here. This is not, doesn't have to be that. But the reason that they have this is that you have to be given something of value. You have to be actually investing using something that has value to it or has value that is based on gold and silver. The financier or the financier, I think that's the right way to say it, the person who's financing, not the person who's taking the money, but the person who's giving it, permits the worker to engage in trade that is unrestricted or restricted to things typically available. So when you're financing or you're investing or you're doing qirad or mudaraba, you can actually, when you give the money to the person, you have to give them permission to work, like to take it and go and do business with it. You can restrict it to a certain type of business. You can say, look, I am financing or investing in you to start a business in buying and selling cars. I'm not doing it in diamonds or salt or no, I don't want that stuff. I just want, this is the only commodity that I'm willing to invest in you. So you can do that. Or you can say, look, you're smart, you seem to know what you're talking about. I'm going to invest in you. Go ahead and use that money in whatever way that you want to use it. You don't have to restrict it if you don't want to, but you're allowed to. And the financier stipulates for the worker a known portion of the profit. So the worker, the person who's actually taking the money and going and investing, working it and selling and buying and doing stuff, there has to be a share of the profit that is agreed upon up front. the share of the profit, it means to be a percentage mean. It has to be in that term. For the Shafi'is. For others, there are different ways of doing it. It doesn't have to be a percentage. It could be an amount. Even though whenever it's an amount, it seems more as a wage. Like if it's just an amount, meaning go ahead, work with this money, and once you make 100, that's yours. Everything over 100 is mine. That turns it more into paying this person a wage, but not really, because if they don't make 100, they don't get anything at all. So for the Shafi'is, that's not okay. For other madhahib, they have certain caveats. They're okay with certain aspects of that, but the Shafi'is aren't. It has to be a percentage, meaning once there's a profit, the person working has to have some money enter their pockets. Like it has to happen. But they're okay with the financier not taking anything under a certain amount. Like if I give you the money, here, go work with this money. Once you make over this amount, I want a percentage, or I want to be involved in the percentage over this amount. Anything under this amount is all yours. Or I can say it's just yours. To take my money, work with it. The capital is mine, obviously. Work whatever you make is yours. I can do that as well. The Shafi'is have a problem. Some of them have a problem with that as well, but other madhab are okay with it. And again, it all comes down to how they define what this contract. It's all about if a contract is clear. Is it void? Is it fair? Does it make sure that people's wealth is not lost and people's energy and effort is not lost? And you're saying this is what the scholars are thinking about when they're judging whether this contract is going to work or not. Is it clear? Is it fair? Is anyone going to be? Is there a loophole in it to cheat someone out of their money or their effort? And is it a back door for riba? These are the kind of things they're always thinking about when it comes to these contracts. So the worker is not liable except when there is transgression. So if you lend me your money or if you finance me, here's some money, you have an idea, I like your idea, here's the money, go and work that idea. So you restricted it to the idea. You didn't give me the money to work anything I want, right? So here's your idea, you have a nice app idea, you need some money, here's the money, go make your app. So I start making the app, I make the app, I do everything, and I lose all the money. Unless you can prove I was neglectful, unless there's negligence, then you don't get anything. You can't come after me asking for the money because you have to be able to prove that I was negligent. That's what investing is. If you invest, you can lose. You can end up with nothing at all, and that's just how it is. If there's both profit and loss, the loss is compensated by the profits first. So and this is, for example, if you're an entrepreneur and you open like a couple of businesses with the money, and one business is making money, the other one is not, you have to kind of sum it all up. And then whatever there's a loss, you have to use the profit to close that loss so the capital is not gone. And then whatever is left, that's the profit that you divide. So you can't say, well, I went on this venture, I made 100K, here I lost 50K, I'm going to take my 20% as a worker from the 100K. No, you can take it from the 50K because there's 50K that was lost here that you have to fill up with the profit that you made. I made a few points, I think, after this, didn't I? Yeah. So here's just a few things to kind of know about qirad or mudaraba or investing or profit sharing or all the words up there, all fall under the same idea. It depends on what madhab you're studying and what book of fiqh and what they call it, but it's all the same idea. Definition: to borrow money for some type of work, business, and then the profits of that work is shared between the one who borrowed the money and the one who gave the money, or the financier or financier. What is it? What's the right? You're the English teacher. How do I say this word? No, it's right there. Financier. Financier. Okay, thank you. Financier. Thank you. Not that I'm going to do either parts of this at any time. So conditions: it must be based on money. The person borrowing the money must be capable of using it. The money borrowed may be specified in its business use. There needs to be an agreed upon split of the money, so it has to be some profit share that's agreed upon. The person who uses the money is not liable for its loss unless transgression can be proven. If the one who's providing the money ends the contract without evidence of negligence of the one who borrowed the money is owed for the work invested in the joint venture. I just want to make that clear. So I invest in you to build the app. You're doing your job. You're building the app. You spend maybe 500 hours working, and then in the middle of it, I pull my money, and there's no evidence that I was of negligence in it all. Then you owe me for 500 hours of work at my highest wage. You owe for all that. You have to pay that to me because that's not fair. We agreed that this was going to be a financing. I'm going to see through the business that I'm working on. So if you're going to pull your wealth out, then there has to be that. Now today, this doesn't happen because there's always agreements in terms of how much, once you invest, that money, especially in we're talking about the bigger, in the millions of dollars, it's just, within the contract there are clauses that force the person who's investing to keep the money in for a certain period of time, or until, to a deadline. The deadline for you to get your app up and running is going to be a year and a half, so I have to keep money into that. That becomes a little bit of a problem here, because when they talk about mudaraba or qirad or investing or whatever else you want to call it, they specify that it cannot be, the financier cannot be forced to keep his money in something. They can't be forced to do it. You can say, well, he's agreeing by signing. True, but at some point in the middle of it, if he wants to pull back and pay the person for their hours, then they're being forced. So that doesn't mean that it's not valid Islamically. It just means that it's going to be a different type of contract. Like, it's not going to be called this anymore. It's going to be called something different, which we do have. And the person still always owns the capital. So when I put in the money, if I say I invested for 50,000, I am getting maybe, let's say 60%, 40% of the profit, for example, right? After we calculate all of the expenses and the losses and all that, I get 40% of the car. I still own 50% of your company. Like, I still own that, the capital is mine. Unless we specify that once this company is open, you only own, you own shares of the company, or that capital is yours, and the company is all. I mean, there can be agreements between the person who borrowed the money and the financier in terms of what that capital is going to look like, but that capital is always owed, meaning as long as there's money. What if the company collapses? Well, then, if there's no evidence of negligence, he's not owed the money anymore. And that's the difference between this and just taking a loan from a bank, for example. See, the bank, or buying a bond, or whatever, other ways of kind of financing your business, for them, it's the same thing. Okay, we're going to take back, here's $50 million, go ahead and work. They always owe that $50 million, it's theirs. You're paying them a certain amount every month. The difference is, you're paying them a specific amount, regardless of whether you're making money or not. So that's the first difference. It doesn't make a difference. They don't care. You're going to pay us this percentage of interest, or this, you can call it a premium, call it interest, you can call it whatever you want. It's a percentage of the money that they own. Meaning I put in $50 million, I want 10% of that $50 million every month. Okay, great. If I make that much, sure. But if I don't make that much, or if I lose this month, then what do we do then? You still owe me, which is a problem. Islamically, it's a problem. We can dance around this as much as we want. This is Islamically a problem. Philosophically, it's a problem. I have spent way too many hours talking about this with people and arguing it and trying to find it out. Islamically, that concept is a problem. Where I put in 50 million and tell you pay me 10% of that every year or every month. I don't care whether you make money or not. That is not investing, and that's kind of the definition of shark loaning or riba. That's kind of what riba is, right? And then I still own the 50 million, whether you lose the company or not. You still owe me 50 million. That's a second difference. Now you can say, well, if I lose everything in this time and age, and I file for bankruptcy, that person loses their money. True, but I have to file for bankruptcy in order for you to lose your money. But in mudaraba or qirad, no. If I go into this business and I try to make a lot of money and I lose, like my business just collapses, not because of negligence, but because of whatever, the stock market didn't work out, or I wasn't experienced enough, or I made some mistakes, then you lose your money too. But in this system, no, you don't lose your money. I always owe you that 50 million. If I file for bankruptcy, then technically you kind of lose your money. But if I have it, even after we went into this profit sharing venture, then I'm going to have to pay you back from pocket. And that's not Islamically, that's not mudaraba, that's not qirad, that's a problem. These are the two main differences. I'm not sure if that made sense to you. The two main differences between mudaraba, qirad, and financing, investing, and taking a loan off a bank is that here it's based on a percentage. You have to pay a percentage of what you make. If you don't make, you don't pay. There, you owe a specific percentage of what you took the loan on, regardless of what you do. Here, if you lose all the money in your entrepreneur venture and there's no evidence of negligence, then the money is that's the end of it. Here, you always owe it. You can only stop owing it if you file for bankruptcy and you have nothing, and you may end up even going to jail eventually. So it's very different. And Islamically, there's always going to be a problem with that form of lending. Now, me saying that there's going to be a problem It's different than saying that it's haram for all Muslims to engage in it in specific situations. But I'm saying that Islamically, from a philosophical perspective, meaning from an Islamic ruling, understanding, conceptual perspective, this is always going to be a problem. It's never going to be something that we okay and say this is good and let's encourage everyone to get involved in because of the way that it's actually worded and what it actually stands for. Now, what you can get involved in, that's a different story. That comes down to the reality of the time and place that you're living in, with a lot of caveats, obviously, and I'm not going to go into it, at least not yet. So we're talking about watering crops for stipulated. This is pretty simple. والمساقات جائزة على النخل والكرم ولها شرطان أحدهما أن يقدرها لمدة معلومة والثاني أن يعين للعامل جزءا معلوما من الثمرة ثم العمل فيها على ضربين عمل يعود نفعه على الثمرة فهو على العامل وعمل يعود نفعه إلى الأرض فهو على رب المال. So this is when watering crops for a stipulated portion of the crops is valid for dates and grapes. Is valid for way more than dates and grapes. But here's more an example. This is more of an example. And the reason that he used the example of dates and grapes is because that's where zakah becomes more important. And they talk about zakah, so he uses that same example. So the two conditions are following: the specification of a known duration and the specification of a known portion of the crops for the worker. So you have a piece of land and you have a couple of hundred apricot trees or peach trees or date trees, palm trees, or whatever it is. And you don't want to work there, but you own the land. So you hire me to irrigate, take care of the land, irrigate the trees, and then whatever crops or whatever fruit that those trees make, I get a portion of it. Now, you could just easily pay me to do the work. That's fine. It's not talking about that here. Like you just hire me and say, here's whatever, a couple $1,000s for the next 3 months. Irrigate the land, take care of it, and then the crop is all yours. That's not as good. You say, well, why don't you just do that? That's easier. Well, it's riskier for the person who's owns the land, because what if nothing comes out of the land? Then I just paid this guy a couple of $1,000s and I didn't get anything out of it. That's number one. Number two, there's not as much incentive in it. So the worker, if you just pay them a steady wage to do the job, they'll do the job. They don't care that much. They're doing what they have to do. But if you tell them that you're only going to get a certain percentage of the trees, then they work much more focused, because their wages are based on whether this tree actually puts out a fruit. So they really irrigate it properly. They do everything that they need to do to take care of it. So it's like it's just making sure that a person's the best interest of the person who owns the land and the best interest of the worker are aligned. Once that's the case, it's the best case scenario, because now everyone's going to do well. So that's allowed Islamically, just to say you'll get 50% of the crops. So that means for him, well, if I work really hard and there's more crops, I make more money. But if you're just paying me a wage, then whether you have a lot of crop or a little crop doesn't make a difference to me. So I don't care. So I'm not going to put as much effort into doing this, because it just doesn't matter to me. With respect to watering crops, work falls under two different categories. It's very simple. Work, the benefit of which returns to the crops, and that the worker has to pay for that. And then the benefit which returns to the land is required from the owner. So let's say the well isn't working. The owner of the land has to make sure the water works. I have to put manure around the trees to help, and that's going to help the crop. Then the worker pays for that. So there's a little bit of a joint cost in terms of who's going to take care of what in the work. Like the pesticides, that's the worker who's going to do that. Making sure that the land is accessible, that's the owner of the land. So it's a joint cost carrying from both. Not that I think any of you are going to be doing this at any point, but it is important to understand at least the logic behind it. Okay, so renting goods and hiring services. وكل ما أمكن الانتفاع به مع بقاء عينه صحت إجارته إذا قدرت منفعته بأحد أمرين مدة أو عمل، وإطلاقها يقتضي تعجيل الأجرة إلا أن يشترط التأجيل، ولا تبطل الإجارة بموت أحد المتعاقدين، وتبطل بتلف العين المستأجرة، ولا ضمان على الأجير إلا بعدوان. So this is when you're renting something, or you're hiring a service to do something. So it is permissible to rent items from which benefit is derived, provided the item is not consumable. Again, I can't rent your apple. Right? I'm going to eat it, so it's not going to work. So anything that's consumable, I cannot rent. I can rent only something that I can benefit from, but I cannot consume. And provided the benefit is specified by either duration or work to be performed. So I'm renting it from you for the next 3 days, that's fine. Or I'm renting it from you until I finish building this house. and I'll give it back. So it can be based on the completion of a task. That's fine as well. Wages are due in advance unless they are speculated to be deferred. So stipulated to be deferred. So wages meaning if I rent something from you, I take it, I owe you to pay for it immediately unless we have an agreement that I'm going to pay you at the end. If we specify that, then that's fine. If we don't specify that, then I owe you the money up front. Meaning if I take it and then we don't specify I'm going to pay you later, you can come and say I want to be paid now. And you have Islamically the legal right. Again, this is what these mutun, a lot of them were used to actually write legal documents within the Khilafah, like for Muslim Khilafat and Muslim, by the way, the way the Muslim Khilafah worked for the majority of time was very similar to how the states within the United States work, or maybe even the provinces in Canada. I don't know for sure how the provinces in Canada work. Meaning a lot of the laws, financial laws and personal marriage laws and divorce laws and inheritance were province by province or wilaya by wilaya. So the wilaya that were all Shafi'iyya, they would go by a Shafi'i textbook, and the rules of buying and selling and going into ventures was going to go by the Shafi'i madhab, or what was prominent in that madhab. And if you went, for example, to other parts of the Muslim world, if you went to Tunis, Tunisia, or Maghrib, then you would find that the Maliki madhab would. So these were actually turned into legal documents. It wasn't just fiqh that we study today. Today, these aren't legal documents. The legality of stuff are discussed elsewhere. This is more for you to understand the rationale behind how they came up with this stuff. And I find it to be very important for a Muslim, at least to study one matan, just to understand that, just to have a basic idea of how this was processed in the past. The contract is not nullified by the death of one of the parties, because if you remember tawkil, we talked about wakala, when you contract someone to be in your place, that ends when one of them die. But here, when I rent something from you, if you die, it doesn't make a difference. The rent still is. I'm still going to use what we had agreed to, and I'll just pay your inheritor, your heirs after you. It is voided if the rented item is destroyed. Obviously, if I'm renting something and it's destroyed, we have to go back and... So what happens there? So I'm not sure why... So the renter is not liable unless there's transgression. I don't know why it's so far down. Maybe can you just do decrease the zoom? So if I rent something from you and it gets wrecked, only if I... very good. Exactly. Only if I transgressed against it. Again, you have to prove that you have to prove negligence. You have to prove that I actually ruined it myself. If it got ruined, it was put in the right place, it was taken care of, but a natural phenomenon occurred and it got destroyed, then I'm not going to be liable for that. And you can hear when the Muslims talking about this, la daman, la daman. Daman meaning who's liable and who's not liable. This is where insurance came from. The concept of insurance came from these terms, this terminology in legal documents. What do we do? So I rent your tractor, or and I use it for the month, and then I bring it back and it's all wrecked. And I didn't do anything about it. There was just really something happened, and at the time a tree fell. It was parked in the right place. The tree fell and broke something. So who's going to pay for this? So people fought, Islamically, but historically people fought. The way it was done Islamically is that unless you can prove the person who took it is transgressed against it, then the person who owns it is liable for it. They have to pay for it. That became an opposite incentive for people to actually rent things out, lend things out, give things out, because now they were liable unless you can, because it's very hard to, how do you prove negligence? If I'm going to invest in you, here's $550, here's all my money, and you go and you blow it all away, how do I prove your negligence? I have to pay another 100 whatever to a lawyer to try and prove that you were, and then the money goes to the lawyer anyways. Like, how do I prove that you're it's very hard to do so. So people aren't willing to do that anymore. It's easier to sell your money. It's easier to hear 50. I'll lend you this much. You'll pay me 10%, and you owe me the money even if you lose everything. That's way more. That's just there's no risk in that. So Islam is very big, and I explained this a couple of times in riba when I talked about this a few weeks ago. That Islam is very clear on who carries risk. Risk has to be shared by both parties. You can't have one group carrying all the risk and one group carrying none of the risk. Especially if the group that's carrying none of the risk are the people who have all the money. So they have all the money, they have none of the risk. Right? Here's 50 million. I have the money. This is my money. And I don't carry any other risk. If you lose it, if you don't, it does not my problem, right? And then the person who has no money is carrying all the risk. That is a nice little recipe to make sure that the person who has no money always continues not to have money. And the people who have money will always have it. So you have to balance that out again. So investment is a way to do it, but investment without proper insurance, without making sure that there are ways to ensure that this person's wealth is not going to be blown away or misused is also unfair. So this is where these conversations, these financial, economical conversations come into play within legalities within Islamic law, and that's what we need today to discuss amongst ourselves. Scholars need to talk about this more so that we can figure out ways to finance people's businesses, to help entrepreneurs, at the same time not have wealth completely thrown away. Yeah.
You asked me to remind you.
Yeah, we'll come in. Once we come to endowments, you can remind me of your question. We're coming to it very soon, inshallah. Okay, so that's what I have to say about this, without going into too much detail. Wages, this is simple. والجعالة جائزة وهي أن يشترط في رد ضالته عوضا معلوما فإذا ردها استحق ذلك العوض المشروط له. So this is wages for finding something. It's not just general wages. I don't know why he didn't explain what this is actually is. It's a little bit more than that. جعالة, so this is called جعالة. Wages are permissible. So جعالة is permissible. For example, wages are stipulating that whoever returns one's missing property will be given a specific reward. Whoever returns the property deserve the stipulated reward. So you're allowed to actually do it. You're allowed to say, I lost this thing. Whoever finds it for me, gets bounty. Like, bounty hunters, people know bounty hunters. But not necessarily people, but for things that were lost or things that were taken away. Something's very, very important to you. You call the police. They took my car. They say, yep, okay. Close down, never look at it again. And they don't even take the name, but they don't care. They have too many problems, not going to care about your lost car. But you care about this car, or you care about whatever it is that's taken for you, so you actually put out a bounty. Or you say, if whoever finds this for me, I owe him this much, and you incentivize people who have the ability to actually go and get what you want, and that's permissible Islamically. It's called jihada. It's not a problem at all. And that's all you need to know about it. وإذا دفع sharecropping, this is nice. وإذا دفع إلى رجل أرضا ليزرعها وشرط له جزءا معلوما من ريعها لم يجز وإن أكراه إياها بذهب أو فضة أو شرط له طعاما معلوما في ذمته جاز. Okay, so sharecropping. So this is different from irrigating land, musaqa, where you have trees. Right? Trees are different than stipulated crops like wheat and barley and stuff like that, because you guys obviously drive outside of London and you see some parts of the land, there's actually trees, there are vineyards, there's actual, they're going to be there every time you go, they're going to be there and they look differently, but they're there. Other pieces of land are just pieces of land, and then there's corn for a while, and then it goes back to a dead piece of land. So crops function differently than trees, obviously, but just kind of remember that. And when we talk about fiqh, the fuqaha, they know that, so they talk about them differently. So if sharecropping is not permissible, this is interesting, because this is not what the Shafi'i madhab believe anymore. At least have not for the last maybe 300 years. So this is an old opinion in the Shafi'i madhab that doesn't carry its merit anymore. I think so Imam Nawawi is of the opinion that sharecropping is permissible for a known portion of his crops. Most of the later Shafi'is follow him on this. I don't know currently of any Shafi'i scholar who doesn't, because growing up in Syria, this happened all the time. So this action here of sharecropping, all the time. You had a piece of land, you were too lazy to go work on it yourself, and you didn't want to work on it yourself, and there was nothing in it. You basically, a property owner presents land to a person to cultivate and stipulates a known proportion of his crops as rent. Meaning, here, go. So I'm not going to take rent from you off the bat, because you may end up losing, but go and work the land and grow your wheat or whatever, and whatever you make off, I get 20% of it because I own the land. That initially in the Shafi'i madhab wasn't acceptable. It's actually, if this was a more, maybe we do a second level Shafi'i study. We'll talk about why did they think that was not permissible versus why they thought it permissible later. It's interesting because it's a philosophical change of ways of thought that they moved on to. It is permissible, but this is not the case anymore. So this is no longer the case. It is permissible if the owner rents out the land for gold or silver, or stipulates a known amount of food which becomes a personal debt that the tenant owes. Meaning, at the time, if I own this piece of land, I'm like, okay, you're going to grow wheat, I want 20 tons of wheat. See, that's okay, because you can just pay me, you can just go buy 20 tons of wheat and give it to me. So it's like you're paying me rent for a specific, asking for a percentage for them wasn't acceptable. So if I want 20% of your wheat, at that time the Shafi'i said no, but 20 tons of wheat is fine. Even though it may end up being the same thing because you may end up getting 100 tons of wheat. But for them it wasn't. Shafi'is today and the majority of madhab, I don't know an opinion that actually refuses this anymore, are completely fine with it being on a portion of his crops, like on a percentage. They don't mind it. But it's interesting to understand, maybe to think a little bit about why they didn't think that was permissible. Again, it all comes down to clarity and not having a backdoor of riba and sharing of risk. That's all this comes down to. All right, so reviving abandoned lands. وإحياء الموات جائز بشرطين. أن يكون المحيي مسلما وأن تكون الأرض حرة لم يجري عليها ملك لمسلم وصفة الإحياء ما كان في العادة عمارة للمحيا. So it is permissible to revive abandoned lands provided two conditions are met. This existed back in the day when abandoned lands were a thing. And that happened here in Canada, right? Maybe 100 years ago or a bit more, maybe a bit more than that. When they first came here, well, the land was owned by others, but we don't have to get into the historical atrocities that occurred there. But after that, once the land was kind of just, okay, we're here, we killed everyone who used to be here. So who owns all this land? Well, it's just open. So if you go find a land that no one's claiming, you could just claim the land if you work on it. If you work on it, then the land becomes yours. And that's how it happened here. And that's what happened a lot in the Middle East. Because people in the Middle East, funny enough, people have been there for what? 6,000, 7,000 years easily. And there's still parts in the Middle East where no one lives. And if you ever, I don't know, you have the Maps app on your phone. One day just open it and just take a look at the globe. And without manipulating anything, you'll see parts of the world all green, green, green. And just go take a look at the Middle East. And it's like someone took a brown brush and just drew it all across the Middle East, like literally all across it. We have so much land there that just doesn't have anything on it. It's just land that's not, it's not land that you can really stipulate crops on. It doesn't have a lot of resources. So people, traditionally would live around the rivers. That's why historically, it was the Euphrates, it was the Dijla, it was Al-Asi, it was the Nile. These are where people lived around until this day. If you go look at the density of population, it's right around these rivers. Everywhere else in the country is empty. Like Syria, when I was there, at least, it's not that anymore. It was 23 million people. 7.5 lived in Damascus. So you're talking maybe a third of the country living in one city, and then the rest of it just open land. Literally, if you just drive far enough to the east, no one cares. In 2015, do you ever see one of those maps they put on to tell you where ISIS owned land? What a lie. Oh my God. And I saw the laugh. Like, what are you talking about? They have their kingdom and parts of that no one lives there. Like, no, there's no one there. Like, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, you see, I own all of this because there's no one but me here for at least 100 kilometers in every direction. Like, yeah, they rule this part. Habibi, no one lives in this part. No one has lived in that part for thousands of years because it's not. So this is something that existed in Syria even until today. Ihya'ul ard. If you go and you revive land that is not being used, there's nothing in it. There's no trees. There's no crops. No one claims it. So here's the conditions. One is reviving it has to be a Muslim. And this is to preserve the land. Again, this text is specific to 850 years ago within Islamic land. So this is within the Muslim world. And that's to preserve land and to stop from causing fitna by other people from different cultures coming and taking lands within the middle of the Islamic world. The land is free of buildings. I mean, there has to be nothing, no evidence of anyone ever owning it, and it cannot be owned by a Muslim. It can't be something owned. But someone owns the land, doesn't take care of it. That doesn't work. So the land has to not actually have a deed owned by anybody. And reviving land takes place by doing whatever is typically needed to build up an abandoned land. So whether it's digging a well, whatever the urf is, whatever the norm is in terms of how do you define land that has been revived. Is it by having a well in it? Is it by building a house? Is it by putting a fence around it? Whatever it is, whatever is defined by that, then that's more than enough. And if you do that, then you can own the land and you can work on it. All right, so water rights, very simple. ويجب بذل الماء بثلاثة شرائط أن يفضل عن حاجته وأن يحتاج إليه غيره لنفسه أو لبهيمته وأن يكون مما يستخلف في بئر أو عين. So one is obliged to give water if requested, provided three conditions are met. Number one, the water is in excess of one's own needs. and their dependents. So you have to have more than what you and your family, your children, your animals, and your land needs. If you don't have access to that, then you don't have to give your water away. Caveat to this, if it's a time of drought, then the excess has to be only for you and your human dependents. So if I have enough water for me, my children, my animals, and my land, but people are dying from thirst, then my land and my animals don't count anymore. It's just my family, and then the excess has to be over that. But that is a caveat, doesn't happen very often, but that's the point. And that one, for himself or his livestock, I mean, the person asking for water cannot be asking for water for their land. They have to be asking for water for themselves or for their animals, like some living things that are asking for water. And it's located in its well or spring. They can't come and try, if you have like a tank of water on top of your house, they can't come and ask for that. It has to be within a well or within a spring, something that exists within land. This doesn't happen very often, but it's interesting that these are water rights. It's like just the title up there, I think, is interesting. That water rights. This is something talked about. Like water is a right for everybody. Everyone has the right for it, right to it, and within the right, in the proper circumstance and situation, you can claim your right over water and ask for it. And the person who owns the well, it's fenced into his own piece of land, still are obligated Islamically to actually give that water within the right conditions. And I think that's an interesting thing. But it doesn't go, you don't need to know more than that. والوقف, so here's endowments. So just when I finish talking about this, you can go ahead and ask. والوقف جائز بثلاثة شرائط أن يكون مما ينتفع به مع بقاء عينه وأن يكون على أصل موجود وفرع لا ينقطع وألا يكون في محظور وهو على ما شرط الواقف من تقديم وتأخير وتسوية وتفصيل. So an endowment, which is where you say that this house or this piece of land is for the sake of Allah. Like I am gifting it to the community. Right? You can say either wording is acceptable. You can say this is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is for the community. That's fine. It is something that can be benefited from without being consumed. Again, can't make an apple waqf. You can gift it, you can't because it's going to be consumed. Initial recipients exist and the future recipients be perpetual. Well, it doesn't have to be perpetual, but it doesn't have to be. So you can say, I have made this piece of land waqf for this village, right? For the use of this village. So this village used the piece of land, and then this village ceases to exist maybe 50 years later. Everyone moves out. So what happens to that piece of land is claimed by Bayt Mal al-Muslimin. It was claimed by Bayt Mal al-Muslimin because the recipients don't exist anymore. They're not there, so that can't be just claimed by a person. So it's like dead land, right? No one owns it. You can't just go and claim it, like we just talked about a moment ago. This has to be taken by Bayt Mal al-Muslimin and then used for the best interest of the Muslim nation. All right. What else are we talking about here? Yeah, and it is not something unlawful. Obviously, you can't make waqf something that is haram. That goes without saying. So the endowment must comply with the endower's conditions, including making some recipients eligible before others and giving recipients equal or unequal proportions. So you can make waqf for this family within this village. Okay, this land here is for the benefit of al-fulan, which is maybe a family of 500 or 600 people. They have dibs on using this land, and if they don't, then the rest of the village have the ability to use it. So you can do that, and you can change proportions where you can say this person here and his descendants, they have 60% of the land, and this over here get 40%. All that is totally acceptable when it comes to endowments, but it has to be, as for the Shafi'is, it has to be forever. If it's not really an endowment. So you can't say, I'm going to give it to this community for 100 years. No, that's not endowment. It can be called something different. It has another name. But waqf means once you offer it, this is for as long as the recipients exist and it's benefited from and it's not unlawful, then it is going to go until the end of time. There's actually awqaf that are like that. And if you go, in Saudi Arabia, I actually went to this. You can go to the orchard that Uthman ibn Affan made waqf 1400 years ago. There's actually a piece of land, not close to it, but like maybe a little bit to the north, where it was made waqf by a gentleman 675 years ago, and there's like the paperwork is still there, and it's signed by the Khalifa. It's like every year after it was, every generation after it was continued to be signed as used as endowment for Muslims who lived around there. So this is something that is real. It can totally be used. What was your question for endowments?
The question was about money being waqf.
Yeah.
And whether or not zakat was required on it.
So money made waqf is a bit more complicated because it can't be something that's consumed. Waqf can't be something that is consumed. A company could be made waqf. Like a company that has assets and has its own, and then whatever money it makes goes to the community can. But for a fund, for example, and the fund obviously can be used, it could be a fund that all the Muslims put money into, and they use it proportionally for the Muslim community, that's fine. The fund itself, the concept of the fund itself becomes a waqf. The money itself can't be waqf, like, because you can't, if I'm talking about this piece of gold, it can't be waqf, it can be given as donation for the ummah. But the system of distributing wealth, which is what a fund is, that can be waqf. And a company that functions can be made waqf. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. The way that, let's say, modern endowments work.
Yeah.
Is there's pools of money
Yeah.
that fund projects.
Mhm.
So the idea is that maybe we start.
Yeah, and I don't think I think it's just an issue of terminology. I don't think that's Islamic waqf. So the pool of money that you're talking about, who runs it? Like who manages the money?
A board.
So that board will be an institution or an entity. That entity can be waqf. That entity can be waqf, but the money itself, you can't make money waqf because it's going to be consumed immediately. You can use it'll be donation, right? So it's a little bit different. So waqf is, for example, this masjid, if the land is given, then this land becomes waqf, and this place has to be a masjid till the end of time, or has to be a place where Muslims are served, and it cannot be owned by someone later on or bought. So for the endowment the way you're talking about it, yeah, it can be done that way, and zakah would not apply to it. No. You wouldn't have to pay zakah for it. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Does that answer your question? Okay. And it's something that totally can be done. It's we don't use this concept very well. We don't use this concept very well. As Muslims, we don't use it very well. We should. And I'm hesitant to even say what I want to say about this, but when you give money for the sake of Allah, but then an institution goes and buys it, and they go buy land with it. Use that money, they buy land. What is that land? It's owned by the institution. Is that waqf? Because it should be. It shouldn't be anything else. Like it has to be waqf for the community. It can't be something else. And you're saying what I'm saying? Because the institution owns it. At some point, they decide to sell it. Let's say the institution exists all over the country, and you gave them money to buy a piece of land. In your mind, you're thinking, everyone is, this is the default. This is waqf. You're going to use something so that we can all use. So you buy the piece of land, it's waqf, we're using it. And then that institution finds that it can't fund all of these projects all over the country, so they restrict themselves to 2 cities and sell all of the other pieces of land they have elsewhere. That becomes a big problem. Like that becomes Islamically a crime. Like that's a very big problem, because you took people's money based on the fact that you were going to do something that is waqf. That's going to continuously serve the Muslim community that live within that city. So that can never be used for anything else. You can't take that money and pump it into something different. That has to be left for that, for the waqf that they want. And this is scary, and I've talked about this with people who are in institutions many times before. That when people give you money, their default is that this is going towards something that is going to be used as an endowment for waqf, in some form. Or a service. If it's for a service, that's fine. Like if they're giving it in their services running, that's fine. But if you're going to purchase something with it, the purchase has to be waqf. And it has to continue. It cannot be something that is later on consumable, or something we sell later on or move on to something else. That's a bit dangerous, because people's wealth is being put into this. So that's why I think waqf has to be better defined and then better executed and exercised within our society, because we need awqaf. We need endowments as Muslim society. We need spaces and entities and institutions and where this is specifically for the Muslim community, where no one has ownership on it. No one specifically on it. Muslim community manages it. They can manage it, but it's not owned by anyone. No one actually owns it. And that's a little bit where things become a little bit sticky as far as I can tell.
Just to continue that thought, so if we were to start a waqf for funding university chapel,
Yeah.
and we would take X amount of dollars and invest it,
Yeah.
and from that generated capital.
That's fine.
Capital
Yeah.
itself, the generated capital,
Yeah.
this is how normally funds work.
Sure.
Endowments work, is you fund a position or you
Yeah.
fund
You wouldn't call it waqf. You wouldn't call that capital waqf. It would be donation. It would be a form of donation. But the group or the group that are investing that wealth, that entity can be waqf. Because that may be of value at one point. Meaning it's a company, people have experiences, they know things. So that actually can have value, and that would be waqf. But the capital itself, because you could lose it. Like it's generating wealth. But what if you lose it all? Then, because you can't have waqf that can just disappear. It can't be consumed. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit. So the terminology Islamically becomes a little bit more challenging. Wallahu a'lam. وكل ما جاز بيعه جاز هبته ولا تلزم الهبة إلا بالقبض وإذا قبضها الموهوب له لم يكن للواهب أن يرجع فيها إلا أن يكون والدا وإذا أعمر شيئا أو أرقبه كان للمعمر أو للمرقب ولورثته من بعده. So everything that is permissible to sell is permissible to offer as a gift, obviously. And again, we talked, if you want to know what is permissible to sell, you go back to the beginning of this chapter and there are conditions. So whatever is permissible to sell is permissible to be offered as a gift. The gift does not become binding until the recipient takes possession of it. Once the recipient takes possession of it, the one who offered it cannot, what is that word? Renege? Can't take it back, all right? Just speak English here. Except in the case of a father taking back the gift from his son. So if I'm going to give you a gift, here's the gift, and then after I walk away, I regret giving you that gift because I wanted it myself, I can't take it back from you. Unless I'm your dad, then you have to give it back to me if I want to. And because there's a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ specifically where the son had to return the gift to his father. Otherwise, the Prophet ﷺ قال الراجع في هبته كالراجع في قيئه. The person who takes back his gift is like someone who vomits and then وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. All right. If someone gives someone something for as long as he lives or they live, or say, if I die first, this is yours, it belongs to the person addressed or his heirs after. So if someone said, here, this is for you for as long as you live or I'm allowed. If that person dies, then it immediately goes to the person that was promised or to that person's heirs after them. So this is a binding verbal contract. This is actually ownership going from one person to the other, even if it's conditioned for someone's death or it's conditioned to a lifetime. It's still applicable, and it's important to know. So there's a lot of stuff here. Oh my gosh, this is long. But it's not. But I mean, how many times are you going to use this in your life? Probably never. You're never. I don't know when the next time is you're going to find a lost item, and you're going to have to go through this long thing of what to do. So if you find something, if you find a lost item, something just on the street, you find a car. No. Okay. But you find something of value. Maybe a piece of gold, right? So you found it, and it's been dropped by somebody. So what do we do? So all of this is to explain what to do. So وإذا وجد لقطة في موات أو طريق فله أخذها وتركها وأخذها أولى من تركها إن كان على. Can you just zoom out because I can't read the I haven't memorized this method, or at least I haven't memorized this piece of it. وإن كان على ثقة من القيام بها. So if one, just maybe zoom out a few times because this is a big one and I need to. Yep. One more. Perfect. Leave it that way. So if one finds a lost item in an uninhabited land, so places where there's not a lot of people around, where you can go around and return it to maybe hang it up for someone to see later on. It's found in a place where it's not inhabited. So let's say you're walking in the grasslands out there, and you find a diamond, or you find wallets or with money in it, or you find something of worth. So what do you do then? So you may take it or you may leave it. You're allowed to leave it, just not touch it and walk away. You're not obligated to pick it up and then go through this whole hassle of what to happen. But if you are taking it is better than leaving it if one is sure that they're trustworthy enough to take care of it. Meaning, if you feel like, no, I'm trustworthy, I will go through all of this properly, then you should take it. If you feel like, you know what, I don't want to get involved in this, so you just leave it, that's permissible Islamically as well. وإذا أخذها فعليه أن يعرف 6 أشياء: وعاءها وعفاصها ووكاءها وجنسها وعددها ووزنها ويحفظها في حرز مثلها. All of this is just based on his his examples that he saw, like the guy who wrote it, of finding something on the street. So what you need to know from all this is when it takes the item, the person must know the 6 things about, which is, so exterior, cover, stitching, type, quantity, and weight, meaning you need to have a full description of it, because you're going to be required to describe it properly. You're going to be required to have proper description, because someone's going to come say later and say, yeah, that's mine. What you found is mine. Give it to me. Well, then you have to say, well, what is it? Yeah, you found a wallet, right? Yeah, it's mine. Can you elaborate a little bit? You have to know the description, so that the person, when they describe it, if they're claiming it, you have the description. Or if you don't know the description, because things may change with time. You may find it, and then 20 years later, it's all crumpled up, doesn't look the same anymore. You have to know what the description was when you found it, so you have to memorize it. So ثم إذا أراد تملكها عرفها سنة على أبواب المساجد وفي الموضع الذي وجدها فيه فإن لم يجد صاحبها كان له يمتلكها بشرط الضمان. Okay, so it must be safeguarded in a place typical for its protection. I love حرزي مثلها in the Islamic law, typical of something's protection. You're only required to do what is typically done within your society. Right? Whatever is typically done. If you, for example, for insurances, this is important. So if it's typical that people park their cars on a driveway, then if it's stolen, you're not negligible. You're not liable. Because the question is it typical? Well, in this society, it is. I can take you to other societies where it's not. Parking in driveways is not typical. People don't do that because it can get stolen. So if you do something that is not typical, it's not the urf, not the norm, you're liable. But if you do what is the norm, then you're not. So when you're safeguarding something, you do what is typical. So for example, it's going to come very soon, if I'm trying to hold on to something and I'm putting it in one of those storages, like the storage places, and I'm paying money for it, and it gets stolen from there, I'm not liable, because that's typical. That's what people do. That's what people, usually, that's where they keep them. You could say, well, you should have kept it in a safer place, or there's this one storage place where you pay 10 times the amount and it's underground and whatnot. But that's not typical. That's not what people usually do. That's not the urf. You're only required to do what is typical, what is the urf at the time, and that's very important to understand. All right, no. So if one wants to assume ownership of the item that they found, they must publicize the item for 1 year on the doors of mosques, not inside the mosques, and in the vicinity in which the item was found. If the owner is not found, one is entitled to assume ownership provided one guarantees the item. So here's the point. You need to understand. You found the lost item. In order for you to own it, now you may say, I don't want to own it. I'm just going to hold on to it. I'm going to hide it somewhere for someone to find it. Now, even if you want to do that, you are obligated for at least a year to publicly talk about it. You have to put up flyers. You have to advertise that you found it in the area in which you found it, and on the doors of masajid. You can't do stuff in here. You can't walk into the masjid and say, I found this, if anyone has it. It doesn't happen inside the masjid. This is a place for dhikr Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and knowledge. But you can do it right outside of masajid. That's why masajid, you're supposed to have a lot of stuff happening outside. Masajid aren't supposed to be dead on the outside. They're supposed to be alive both inside and outside. Inside, they're alive with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowledge, teaching, all of that. And then outside, people are selling and buying and getting married and doing whatever else they want to do outside. They do all that outside. And then in the masjid, you focus on so that's how masajid are supposed to be run to begin with, by the way. But we don't do that. So yes, if you found something, for a full year, you're obligated to go around telling people that you found it right on the doors of masajid for a full year. If a full year, no one claims it, it's yours. But you still guarantee it. Meaning, if 10 years later, the person who owns it shows up, you have to give them the value of the item or the item back if it's still with you. I'll end with that because we ran out of time, and we'll continue this piece inshallah. So there's only a little bit left of the matan. We will complete it next week, and then I will do a quick revision of everything that we talked about. I'll tell you what the exam is going to look like, or the evaluation, and then and the evaluation will be the week after, and then we'll have the week after that inshallah off. Bi-idhnillah ta'ala. Subhanallahi wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa